I don't mind, you can do some. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to those of you who are joining us online, which is very exciting. I'm going to hand over very briefly for Alex to do some housekeeping for people who are here in person, and then I'll do a bit more introduction.
Jane. Morning, everybody. I'm Alex Walker. I'm the Head of Preventive Conservation here at the Bodleian Libraries, and we just wanted to welcome all of our in-person guests here today and our online guests as well. There isn't a planned fire alarm today, so if the fire alarm does go off, the fire exits are, if you go out the lecture theatre to the left, and then we assemble just outside on Parks Road on that side of the building. There's going to be lunch after the session this morning, followed by some tours in the afternoon. So if you haven't signed up for a tour, please do let me or my colleague Catherine know, and we'll be able to sign you up for one of those later on. I'll hand you back to Jane, and I hope you enjoy the day.
So for anybody that doesn't know me, I chair the Pest Odyssey group. It's a relatively informal day today. We hope there'll be a little bit of time for questions, but I would encourage you to continue the conversation on the IO group. If you aren't already a member, you can search on groups.io, or you can have a look at pestodyssey.co.uk and you'll find the sign up. That's an email group. Essentially, there's some diary entries and also a few documents, but it allows you to ask questions, to continue the conversation, to ask for advice. So if you're not signed up, do. It's completely free. All I would say is that we do actually look at your application to join in person. It's lovely Helen, who's down at the front here, who'll be speaking later on. So if it's not obvious from your email address that you are a real person, Helen will email you and say, hello, who are you? Where are you based, so that we know you're not a chat bot or something equally dreadful. Speakers, a little bit of information for you. Please make sure you are speaking into the microphone so that people online can hear you. So try not to wander over here like this to gesticulate your slide, because no one will hear you. Stay here. There is a laser pointer. Oh, I will be sitting just there at the front. There will be a sign that comes up that says 2 minutes and a sign that says stop. And if you don't, I will come and push you off the podium, because we keep to time at these events. So stand up, speak up, shut up, keep to time. Thank you very much. Unusually for me, I am not going to do a sum up at the end of this session. We are recording, so if you've missed anything, you will be able to catch up with it later, I hope. And like I said, use the IO group. For those of you online, if you have questions, please use the chat function, and we will be monitoring that so that we will try and pick up your questions again if we have time. And again, if you're online, please be aware that you have 2 links, one for this morning's presentations, which are recorded, and one for this afternoon, which is the panel discussion about wool insulation, which we are not recording. That enables us potentially to name names and be contentious. So in order to protect the innocent, it will not be recorded. If you want to join that, you do need the follow-up link for that. And then that we close then at 1:45. And then for those of you who are here, there are tours. There's an opportunity to ask any advice if you've got any questions. Again, to follow up with the speakers, or just generally to chat, because it's very nice to see each other in the room. I will make the point that most of us in the room at the moment are doing these kinds of jobs because it suits our personality. If we wanted a front of house role, we'd be in one. therefore, the whole talking to people bit can be quite difficult. I do appreciate that. I'm not very good at it either, but do make the effort and say hi, and at least you can ask people if they've got moths. That's always a good icebreaker. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our opening speakers, who are Amy Crossman and A.D. Doyle. Amy is the author of several IPM fact sheets, which are brilliant, and you can find them on what'seatinyourcollections.com, if nowhere else. She does training and is currently the conservator at ICM. A.D. Doyle is now very sensibly retired, but previously was IPM coordinator at the Natural History Museum. And going to talk to us about a survey.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jane, and thank you very much for inviting myself and Amy. As Jane said, this was a survey which was initiated several years ago by myself and Amy after, or rather during, a open meeting, because from my experience there are a huge variety of pest monitors, and also having worked in 3 organisations and speaking to Amy and various other people, we're wondering whether or not people were using them correctly, whether we were getting the information that we wanted, and is there anything that doesn't work. And those of you who've been using pest monitors for some time will appreciate that certain things work better than others. There have been changes in design over the last couple of years, perhaps over the last 10 years, and obviously the increased use of pheromones, which we will find have been more or less effective. So the survey was sent out via Google Links, and we just went straight in, and I have lots and lots of the whole report. If anybody really wants to have a sleepless night, you can go through the whole lot, because I have made a list of every single statement that was made on the survey. Some of the questions were yes, no, some of them were more specific, and some of them were open field questions. If anybody's still interested, the survey, I can unlink. It's on Google Forms at the moment, but I could theoretically unlink it or reactivate it if you wanted to do another survey. So I don't know if Amy wants to step in at this point, or she's happy for me to just carry on. What we've established is, from the people who replied to the survey, bearing in mind that we expected people who were going to reply to the survey were people who were interested in IPM, it's not unrealistic to think that over 90% of the people were using floor or blunder monitors. I don't know what terminology is familiar to you, but basically it's at ground level. And 50% were using hanging or pheromone-based monitors. 35% were using pheromones in floor monitors, which I thought was actually quite an interesting uptake. And there were 27% of people who were using other types of monitor, which we'll come on to briefly. Now, we then asked the question, if you're using blunder monitors, are you using cardboard ones or are you using plastic ones with an insert? And unfortunately, I've left my computer glasses behind, so I can't see how many people actually replied, but it says so on there.
We had 46 respondents, which equates to 92% who said that they used cardboard blunder traps, and then 12 respondents, which equals 24%, used the plastic ones. One of our arguments was that cardboard-based monitors are more environmentally sustainable, as they can be recycled, but then the plastic models can also be recycled and they can be reused.
And plastic, of course, depending on your point of view, they're either made of polypropylene and polyethylene. They can be recycled and washed. I have heard instances that pheromone lingers in the plastic holder itself and is not necessarily easily washed out. So that's an interesting byproduct, perhaps, of using a plastic pheromone holder. Are they both as effective? No one's really said whether a cardboard monitor is more or less effective than a plastic one. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that later. Dave's nodding his head there. We were talking about blunder monitors, and were we catching insects that we were expecting to catch? And I'll pass over to Amy again. We had 90 odd responses.
94 respondents said that they were capturing the insects that they were expecting, which is fine. And then less than 6% said that the other insects were captured. And we're going to have a look at that and delve more deeply to see what insects they are catching, and whether this has a negative impact on the organisations using these monitors. Are they catching things that we shouldn't be catching? Why is that? Is it due to other reasons, such as monitor placement?
And there's an interesting comment that because they're anonymous, it made it a lot easier to people to speak up. Somebody's actually been catching small rodents on their floor monitors, including field mice. So it makes you wonder where they put the monitors if they're getting field mice, but there we are. So we're actually showing that we are catching things, and as those of you that place monitors of any kind will appreciate that we're getting things stuck to them that we don't want. But is that a problem? So we were also looking at, are we using the monitors effectively? Are we following guidelines, particularly with pheromone monitors, which have a natural shelf life? Now, I know that there is a discussion, and has been since I've been doing IPM, if a pheromone is in a high wind environment, it's going to be carried more perhaps than where the air is still. But does that mean that the pheromone release from the actual monitor itself is enhanced, or is the release the same? So I'll hand over to Amy again, and she can tell you the results, because I left my glasses behind.
51% of all non-pheromone monitors were replaced outside of the general IPM standard of 3 months, which is the usual replacement time that we would use for traps.
I'll carry on here. It's quite possible, and we're looking at reasons behind why are people not following the guidelines recommended by the manufacturer or the supplier. Is it due to lack of time? Is it a lack of understanding that the pheromone doesn't last that long? And we need to delve more deeply into this. My suspicion is it's a combination of both, and the data that I've got suggests that some people are following the guidelines precisely because they are the people who are actually deploying the monitors. Other people are less likely to have the opportunity to follow the 3-month rule for a pheromone monitor because someone else is doing it on their behalf. And indeed, we actually had a question and answer where somebody said it was at the mercy of the contractor. And for some reason that I didn't quite understand, they couldn't inform the contractor to do it as per their arrangements, which seems a rather roundabout way of managing contracts, but there you are. Is it possible for non-pheromone monitors that the adhesive remains effective beyond the 3 months and beyond the normal monitoring period? Again, that depends on the release of the stickiness, if you like. Is it vaporizing in a warm environment? Is it not working because the environment is cold? Is it also due to the fact that there is so much other debris like dead flies and spiders, what have you, and in a dusty environment that the actual effectiveness of the sticky pad, irrespective of whether it's a pheromone or not, is actually working? And therefore, my assessment is that I think wherever possible, the 3-month rule should apply, but that's just my opinion. So we actually looked at the use of pheromone monitors, particularly hanging ones, and they have been available for several decades. And Amy can then chip in and look at actually present the figures to you.
83% of people who use pheromone monitoring for web enclosed moth. This is an encouraging trend as the pheromone traps become increasingly more available and more cost effective. It's probably likely that this is going to continue over a period of time. We found unexpectedly the use of floor pheromone monitors. And these are to monitor for carpet beetle, and 35% of people use those, and silverfish monitors as well, with just over 14% of respondents saying that they use silverfish monitors.
And interestingly enough, the data that we got in the handwritten notes, most people are unsatisfied or dissatisfied with silverfish monitors. They're saying that the design doesn't seem to have any impact, irrespective of the lure. In actual fact, several people said that they wasted a lot of money by buying plastic ones and they'd be better off using cardboard monitors, which is the situation I discovered in the BM, where the silverfish bypassed the new monitors and just launched themselves straight into the cardboard ones. So whatever their preference, let's go for it. We're looking at brands, and again, this was anonymous. We were looking at brands. Were people prepared to tell us what the brand was? And we had discussions about whether or not we were allowed to release this information, and because we are not naming names specifically that this company is in this organisation, we feel that we have the right to state the brands. So Amy's just going to follow that up for a moment.
So just under 60% of people would suggest that they are happy with the product and they would recommend it. And of those, 17% said that they would prefer to keep this information anonymous, and 23% do not use either floor or hanging pheromone monitors.
Thanks, Amy. So let's have a look at the brands itself. You've got better eyesight than I am. Some of them I've got some problems with. There are a couple of kill germs there which may or may not exist at the time. The survey did go outside of the United Kingdom, so we have some examples here. And what I've done is I've done whether the supplier, the notes that came back to us, was it the supplier that, in other words, did you buy from the supplier or did you buy from the manufacturer? And I thought that was quite interesting as well. There's a huge variety. There's no question about that. And I wonder if Dave later on might be able to comment about whether he's seen a twofold, a threefold, or fourfold increase in the availability of monitors, particularly pheromone monitors that have been developed recently. And of course, whether or not they are all as effective as each other. I know. So finally, did the insects catch what they wanted? It's a 50-50 split. Yes, they caught what they wanted, but they also caught 40-40 what we didn't want as well. So unless somebody can magic up a new pheromone that doesn't catch the things you don't want, we are still going to be in a position where we catch insects that we don't want on our pheromones. So there's our summary, which of course will be available. I think these presentations are going to stay on the web for some time. And if anybody wants to look at the more realistic, the more detailed data, which is 25 pages long, you're welcome to it. Thank you very much.
That's a fascinating start to the day. Thank you very much indeed, Amy and Adi. We're going to move on now to Amber from English Heritage. Amber Xavier-Rowe is Head of Collections Conservation at English Heritage. She's got a long history with IPM, which began in 1995. She has the honour of coining the title of Pest Odyssey for the first conference in 2001, for which we're very grateful for giving us the name of the group. So thank you very much, Amber. And is also a coordinator of the landmark Pest poster from English Heritage, which I imagine you all have many copies of because it is wonderful. So Amber's going to talk to us about solar heat treatment in the UK.
Jane, you just... Hello everyone in the room, and good morning to, or good afternoon, or whatever time it is for those of you online. Yes, so I'm going to share our experience with the solar heat treatment. Talk in three parts. I'm going to recap about the use of heat, and then run through 3 case studies. Then I'm going to have a conclusion. Just to introduce you to English Heritage, we're a charity. We care for over 1 million objects in 135 sites across England. That's all the red dots on the map of England. We started IPM in 1995-6. and we manage our IPM by monitoring across 77 sites. And we did our first heat treatment in 1999, and since then have completed 13 different sorts of heat treatments for over 1,000 objects. So I thought I might just start with a reminder about the mortality temperatures for insects. And this table summarises the key insect pests and their mortality rates. It's based on the work done by Strang in 1992. You can see that the temperatures vary, like silverfish 37 up to the outlier, the house longhorn beetle, at 56 degrees Celsius. So the view has been taken that the highest temperature for the most common range of insect pests, and the highest insect pest is the two-spot carpet beetle. You can kill that at 52 degrees Celsius. So that's why there's this, we've taken the line that 52 degrees Celsius for 1 hour will kill all stages of common museum insect pests. And this photo is just showing you where we confirmed 52 degrees was the mortality for death watch beetle when we had some chunks of oak that we knew we had death watch in, and we put half the plank in a heat chamber and kept half a plank out, and David Pinniger happily chopped into both of them and confirmed 100% mortality of death watch beetle at 52 degrees Celsius. So some of you might be wondering, you know, is there a risk of things cracking? And because we wrap objects the same way as we do for freezing, this reduces the amount of moisture that's released from the object, so the buffering effect comes into play. And Tom Strang, who in his younger days illustrated this really nicely with 2 pieces of thin wood veneer, wrapping one in plastic and leaving one unwrapped, and putting them in a fish tank and heating up that fish tank with a hairdryer. And we watched happily as the one unwrapped curled and the one that was wrapped remained straight, nicely illustrating the effect of the buffering effect. And these 2 papers outline in detail the risks from heat, and both conclude that this is very low. So when you heat things up, they, in theory, speed up their aging effect. And so ASHRAE have published this statement about the risk associated with heating. So using high temperature, example 60 degrees for pest control, should not exceed a total of 6 hours per year, 60 hours each 10 years, to maintain 90% of normal lifetime. And this is a reasonable trade-off for reducing the risk of massive insect damage. And then you can plug in using tools like the time-weighted preservation index, which gives you an indication of the lifetime of materials, in this types of paper. See that the difference associated with one heat treatment is very minor in the long-term scheme of things. So I'm just going to give Dr. Tom Strang the final word, slightly paraphrased, but the aging effect of a heat treatment is similar to lighting objects in the case of paper and textiles, or displaying furniture in rooms heated to comfort levels. Right, so what's the real risk? Avoid materials with a melting point below 75 degrees C. Be wary if you have had your collections been, or object has been treated with old pest treatments, particularly DDT and lindane, which will off-gas as you heat. And could be a risk around the denaturing of deteriorated skin and leather, which is really damp. So onto solar treatment. So if you have external temperatures between 26 and 30 degrees C, you can achieve 60 degrees C for 1 hour. Various publications confirming that. And the method is, basic method, is to wrap your object in black plastic, which protects it from light damage and helps with solar gain. Then wrap in clear plastic to create a glasshouse effect. Raise your package off the ground. Insert a temperature sensor to indicate the core temperature. And place in direct sunlight with no wind. There's other methods that I've listed here around tent structures and wooden boxes and so forth. So our first case study is around a modern sofa, which was infested with webbing clothes moth, and they were eating the horsehair upholstery. So we thought in the middle of COVID that this would be a good idea to try this out. The temperature, unfortunately, only peaked to 32.5 degrees C, which was 10 degrees above the external core temperature. Now, has anyone noticed that there's a problem with what we've done here? No clear plastic, well done, Helen. So we wrapped it the wrong way around. And also the object is arguably a bit big for this kind of endeavour. So yes, we put clear plastic on first and then black. You meant to put black and clear. Interestingly or not, we also included a couple of Zensect hanging moth proofers, which have transfluthrin in them as a bit of a sort of added extra. So we left this sofa wrapped for a couple of months and then unwrapped it carefully with masks on. And there were a lot of dead moths, but there were unfortunately some live moths. So we didn't kill them. We ended up sending the sofa to ICM fixed heat chamber in Chiswick, and that killed them. But we also decided to reupholster and with a synthetic material, get rid of the horsehair. So, case study number 2 is one of my jumpers done at home in May. So this time I wrapped correctly, clear plastic, black plastic, clear plastic with a thermometer inserted into the middle of the jumper. The external temperature was 24 degrees on this day, and I did reach 50 degrees after a couple of hours, but not for long enough, not for 1 hour. So you could argue that the core temperature was 45 degrees for 1 hour, not high enough for Pineola basilia, which is 49 degrees. So I just confirmed, which was already published, that you really do need to be, your external temperature needs to be above 26 degrees. Third case study, where we tried it on some taxidermy in a case, and a wooden case and a wool carpet. We were aiming to achieve 50 degrees C, actually be killing webbing clothes moth. So the method here is that we used a plastic pallet and we wrapped that in black plastic polythene, and then the objects were wrapped in black plastic bin bags, and the whole thing was covered with clear polythene. A thermometer was tucked into the middle of the rolled carpet, and we were all ready for a hot day. A hot day arrived. The pallet was moved outside. It was 23 degrees. There's a bit of a theme going here. So we didn't get to the temperature we needed. We only reached 37 degrees. So we tried it again. On that day, the temperature was 29 to 30 degrees C. So it took us 4 hours and 15 minutes to reach the core temperature, 50 degrees C, for an hour. Achieved it. So, in conclusion, right, well, the external temperature needs to be above 26 degrees C if you're going to give this a go. For temperate climates, it could be a practical option for smaller objects as an alternative to freezing. We will try it again. For hot climates, I think this could be the preferred option. You need to remember that there's a certain limit on how thick your objects are. You have to reach a core temperature of 52 degrees. And there's a really nice publication by ICN which describes, making a solar tent. And in that publication, and also in Agnes's work, she confirmed that you really couldn't go beyond a radius of 7.5 centimetres for wood, or for paper objects the size of a phone book, if anyone remembers what phone books were. You used to get all your numbers that you now have. I'm looking at the younger people who've probably never seen a phone book. But anyway, it's about that thick, about that round. And it's safe for the majority of materials found in museum collections, as illustrated by this chap who we inflicted the heat treatment on twice, and we noticed no damage from that. That's it, folks.
Amber's a consummate pro, so she's given us a few extra minutes, which is brilliant. So thank you very much indeed, Amber. So for our next presentation, I would like to invite, I'm not sure if it's just Hans or Jessica, Hans and Jessica. Hans, you're speaking, okay. So I don't have much of an introduction for you, Hans, because you didn't send me one. But Hans works at a company called Art. And is going to talk about investigating the efficacy of low oxygen treatments using argon gas. Explain how that works.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you for being here. My name's Hans, and I work for Art. Art was founded by me and two other conservators, Jessica's one of them, with a range of disciplines in object and textile conservation. Over the years, we encountered a growing number of artifacts that simply couldn't tolerate the more conventional pest eradication methods, such as freezing or heating. These treatments, while often effective, posed some unacceptable risks to certain materials, from soft waxes and composite materials that we dealt with, to highly sensitive mixed media. In many cases, we were left without a truly safe or viable option for treatment. That challenge led us to begin exploring anoxic and hypoxic treatments as a gentler alternative. Methods that could eradicate pests without compromising the materials we were trying to preserve. And from those investigations, Art was born, a company dedicated to developing non-toxic, conservation-safe approaches to pest management in heritage collections. Today, I'm sharing with you one of our most promising findings so far, the use of humidified argon gas in low oxygen environments to effectively control the common clothes moth without damaging the objects under treatment. For many years, pest control strategies have relied on heating objects to around 52 degrees, freezing them to -8, or using chemical fumigants such as ethylene oxide. Approaches are effective against insects, but often come with some drawbacks for the heritage objects we encounter daily. Heat and freezing can physically stress fragile materials, particularly those containing lipids or hygroscopic elements. Chemicals, meanwhile, have become increasingly restricted due to health and environmental risks, and of course, they leave extremely harmful residues. So what we're left with is a need for a method that is effective but also safe for both the object and the people handling it. This brings us to the inert gas treatment, specifically low oxygen or hypoxic environments. Gases like nitrogen and argon don't leave residues, they're chemically inert, and they've been shown to be highly effective at causing mortality across all insects' life stages through suffocation, dehydration, or both. While nitrogen has been most commonly used gas in hypoxic treatments, research has shown that argon may offer certain advantages, particularly in terms of speed and effectiveness. In fact, argon has been demonstrated to be more effective than nitrogen in causing 100% mortality in several pest species, including the case-bearing clothes moth. However, until now, no studies had evaluated argon's effectiveness specifically on the common clothes moth. Our research set out to explore exactly that. We wanted to know, can humidified argon reliably cause complete mortality of common clothes moth larvae? And can it do it faster and under less controlled or lab-like conditions than are usually required? We began by sourcing a population of 240 common clothes moth larvae, all about 5 millimeters in length, from a commercial supplier. Larvae were housed in small PET plastic jars on a diet of wool felt, fish meal, and yeast, standard conditions under which they're reared. Jars were perforated to allow gas exchange, then placed inside airtight chambers made from high barrier foil laminate, each of about 18 litres in volume. Using the Inoxbox 2.1 system, we flushed these chambers with technical grade argon gas that had been humidified to 49.5% relative humidity at a low flow rate of about 3 litres per minute. Our target oxygen concentration was 0.1%, and once this was reached, the chambers were sealed and the tests began. We tested 3 exposure durations, 13, 20, and 43 hours. Control groups were kept at the same temperature and humidity, but within normal oxygen levels. Temperature and RH were monitored continuously using wireless sensors. After the 3 exposure periods, chambers were then opened, and the mortality was evaluated firstly by visual inspection, and then by probing with camel hair brushes and soft forceps, and observing the behavior of the larvae. Larvae were transferred to a petri dish using soft forceps and counted with the aid of a microscope. Any larval movement at all was scored as an alive. After 10 days, the samples were tested again to see if any further changes had occurred. The results were as follows. At 43 hours of exposure, we achieved 100% mortality in the larval population without any observed recovery after 10 days. Even at 13 and 20 hours, mortality was significantly higher than in the control group. We observed visible changes in the larvae during treatment. They became darker, more rigid, and less responsive over time, with no signs of movement or recovery after treatment. What's particularly important here is that these results were achieved without perfectly controlled conditions. Our temperature averaged about 26 degrees Celsius, and our relative humidity average was 52.6%, both within acceptable but not ideal storage environments. What makes argon so promising as a treatment gas isn't just its efficacy, it's the combination of speed, safety, and sustainability. First, the speed. We were able to achieve 100% mortality within just 43 hours. That's comparable to heat treatment and significantly faster than what's often required when using nitrogen. Second, it's safer. Because argon is inert and non-toxic, it poses no risk to the objects being treated or to the staff conducting the treatment. Third, and increasingly importantly, it's the environmental. Many hypoxic treatments rely on oxygen scavengers like ageless, which must be sealed with the object. They are often packaged and contained within multiple layers of plastic, and these are often not reusable and add considerably to plastic waste. Our method avoids this. While argon itself must be produced and transported, it's a byproduct of industrial gas separation processes, not contribute significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. More importantly, it avoids the high volumes of non-biodegradable plastic used in more traditional scavengers. Another important aspect of our study was that it wasn't carried out under ideal lab conditions. In fact, due to user error, our heat sealing wasn't entirely hermetic. The oxygen levels in some chambers rose slightly, requiring additional flushing periods. This mistake was in a sense fortunate for this study, as it not only showed that our system warning settings worked well in alerting us to O2 gas rising levels in our chambers, but it also allowed us to have data for this test from higher average O2 levels than we would normally expect. Despite these fluctuations, we still achieved 100% mortality, suggesting that this method must be more forgiving and more adaptable to real-world conditions than previously thought. We also maintained an average temperature of around 26 degrees Celsius and a relative humidity just above 52%, as I said before. These aren't ideal storage conditions, but they are within the acceptable short-term range for museum objects and much gentler than some other alternatives. All of this points to the technique that could be practical for institutions that don't have access to perfectly sealed chambers or continuous environmental monitoring. Of course, this is just the beginning. Future work needs to look at argon's effectiveness across all developmental stages of the common clothes moth, including eggs and pupae, which may be more resistant to treatment than larvae. We're currently nearing the end of testing on this phase of our research, and we hope to share this new paper within the next 6 months. But the initial data is very positive and in line with what we'd expect. We're also interested in exploring the potential for argon scale chamber systems that we've developed and evaluating its impact on a broader range of materials over longer periods. Another priority is making this method more accessible to smaller institutions, those that may not have advanced pest control infrastructure, but still need safe, effective options by developing our systems to be as cost-effective. To conclude, humidified argon gas in a low oxygen environment offers a fast, effective, and conservation-safe solution for eradicating common clothes moth larvae in heritage collections. Non-toxic, non-damaging, and crucially, avoids the environmental drawbacks of some other methods currently in use. Those of us working in conservation, particularly with vulnerable and complex objects, this represents an exciting step forward. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll be happy to take any questions later.
Thank you, Hans. We're going to now have a brief update on some changes in legislation and how they affect us working with IPM. And we're very fortunate that we have Chris Swindles with us to talk about that. Chris is a principal technical consultant at Kiwa Independent Pest Consultancy. And I have to say, having Chris in was one of the most useful things I ever did in relation to rodents across our sites and whether we had an issue or not. But his experience is much wider than that. And we're doing quite well for time, so I'm thinking we might pause after Chris and take a few questions for the first 4 papers. Okay, so Chris, over to you. Thank you.
Right, morning everybody. I feel like talking about legislation is a bit of a minefield, but also a bit of a poison chalice. It can be a bit of a dry topic, to say the least, and trying to find any suitable photos to stick in the presentation was a massive challenge. And I'm also constrained by the fact that I have to use a corporate slide deck. And again, the images are a bit generic and don't really fit the theme. I was actually hoping to have some interest in legislation updates with regards to invertebrate control, but alas, no, I couldn't find any. Perhaps maybe for the future, there'll be some building regulations with regards to preventing infestation in natural insulation materials. Maybe. It seems to be a hot topic at the moment. So please bear with me. Hopefully the following slides will be of interest, but bear in mind that they are primarily aimed at the UK and are primarily rodent-based observations. So, in the UK, we're actually still addicted to the use of anticoagulants for a large majority of rodent control operations, both internally and externally. There's a group that oversees the use of rodenticides in the UK, the Campaign for Responsible Rodenticide Use. And all product labels dictate how that product should be used. And with regards to anticoagulant rodenticides, there's 3 typical patterns of use, and the labels will dictate that they can only be used indoors or in and around buildings, or there's another phrase, outdoors, around buildings, but it pretty much means the same, or in open areas. And for those that don't work in the industry, there was a recent change at the start of 2025 where the guidance or the pattern of use or the label condition for open areas was removed from second generation or anticoagulant rodenticides in general. This has some implications because in the industry as a whole, we still, as I said, we're addicted to these products, and you still go to many sites where you'll find them littered around the outside of buildings. If you've got parklands and you're trying to treat a problem, you might find them in golf courses or, heaven forbid, near water courses or rivers and lakes. So the removal of open areas does mean now that there's a difficulty in treating rodent infestations that may be away from the actual building. You might notice that when it says in and around buildings, there is actually no definition or a measured distance of how far away from the building can you actually carry out your treatments. So if you had a rat infestation occurring on a fence line in an open area, how far away can you place your rodenticides to treat that rodent infestation? The key thing to acknowledge, though, is that whilst there is no specified distance, if the infestation is having an impact on the building, there's still an opportunity to carry out a treatment. And basically, in the pest control industry, this would be justified by carrying out an environmental risk assessment and also following the label conditions of the product. Currently, there is only one rodenticide on the market. It's not an anticoagulant, and it has an active ingredient, cholecalciferol, which is actually authorized for use in open areas. So there's still an option to treat something if it's away from the building. What I think most people fail to acknowledge, though, is that most anticoagulants used in the UK are not available for use for the control of field mice, wood mice, yellow-necked mice, etc., etc. It's something to be very, very aware of when it comes to monitoring and treating rodent infestations, particularly externally and around buildings. So, another update coming in for 2026. Guidance again is being strengthened. Again, we're sort of addicted to rodenticides in the UK, anticoagulant rodenticides, and one of the measures is the presence of anticoagulant rodenticides in barn owl populations. It's used as a measure to see whether they're being used appropriately. And unfortunately, the residues in barn owls aren't dropping. So to try and improve the situation and reduce the use of anticoagulant or misuse of anticoagulant rodenticides, from 2026, professionals will be required to show proof of an appropriate training course certificate. Some people will probably see this as an opportunity for all the trainers to make more money, because there has to be an element of renewal every 5 years or keeping up to date on a CPD scheme. But I guess there's quite a few in the industry, and particularly in the UK, that think that this probably won't go far enough. And that maybe there should be some more tighter restrictions. For example, in certain countries in Europe, there are licensing schemes, and it might be something that the UK maybe looks to in the long term. I know it's something that some of the trade bodies and associations are considering. Should it be something that they lobby the government for? The upshot of it is, if we don't utilise rodenticides appropriately, there are other bodies like the European Chemicals Agency, or ECHA, and the Biocidal Products Committee, that have gone a little bit further, and they're actually advocating maybe that rodenticides shouldn't be used for rodent control and that we should purely rely on single trap use, which would be potentially a disaster with regards to sort of like public health protection. So hopefully we don't go down that road. So that's an update on some rodenticide use issues. I think everyone in the room is probably, I say everyone in the room and online is probably more interested in the glue trap issue, rodent glue traps. So we've got to bear in mind that the original purpose of the Glue Traps Offences Bill, which later became the Act, was to prevent the misuse of rodent glue boards. And a lot of people are getting a little bit uptight on, if we're sticking out insect glue traps, etc., are we going to fall foul of the Glue Trap Offences Act? In theory, no. If you're putting out an insect trap for the purposes of monitoring insect activity in your demise or in your establishment, it shouldn't be an issue. And I think it's backed up by the fact that the BPCA did a Freedom of Information request specifically to the Metropolitan Police in December 2024. And they hadn't given any training to their officers with regards to what do they do if a member of the public or a professional reports inappropriate glue trap use. And the Wildlife Crime Unit, they've not received any reports. And to date, no campaigns have been run to support the introduction of the Glue Trap Offences Act. And I guess the most concerning thing is that DEFRA actually advise professionals like myself or the members of the public to report the misuse of glue traps to the police. So if the police aren't aware of the legislation or how to police it, then it's a piece of legislation that was obviously introduced with good intentions, but ultimately, it seems to have like fallen a little bit flat after the initial publicity. So again, working in the industry, working with the BPCA, they asked Natural England how many licenses have actually been applied for the use of rodent glue traps. And as yet, they've not been able to provide any data or any statistics. But anecdotally, we know in the industry, there's been very, very few applications for the use of rodent glue traps. I can think of one, and it relates to using glue traps to catch mice on aeroplanes at a large airport. Obviously, it's a critical infrastructure issue, and you don't want your mice chewing your critical control systems in your aeroplane. But beyond that, we've not seen any further publicity with regards to where glue traps have been used under the legislation. And interestingly, the legislation didn't actually stop the sale of glue traps, so it's still possible to buy these products. And there's lots of evidence when you start going on social media of members of the public still using them inappropriately. Protect yourselves. I don't think if you do a risk assessment, if you have to put out insect traps, it doesn't need to be anything more than a couple of sentences that you've assessed the local environment, the traps that you're using, and any history of rodent activity. But as this demonstrates, at the moment, it's not been followed up on much. In Scotland, they did have a bill to ban the sale and the use of rodent glue traps, but the BPCA lobbied for some amendments, and these amendments seem to have been taken on board, and it does leave the room for future professionals. But in Wales, there's already a complete ban on rodent glue trap use. Just a couple of other interesting things. This is very niche. Gliss, the edible dormouse. More of a southern-based thing around Buckinghamshire, a bit of Middlesex, maybe a bit of Bedfordshire, that sort of things. But the only reason why I bring this up is that I came across a contractor that was using rat traps to catch gliss. And for those not aware, you actually need a class license if you ever come across gliss. and you need an approved contractor to carry out the works on your behalf, utilising appropriate live capture traps or specific spring traps. Because ultimately, once you catch a Glyphius, you can't let it go, unfortunately, without his misery. Other minor legislation updates were sort of like bird management related, and they're only minor updates. Nothing that I felt I could really give to you as something that's interesting. But just to finish off, just a couple of updates with regards to Asian hornets. For those not aware, it's a reportable invasive species, and it's typically found in the southeast of England. And during 2024, there were 24 nests discovered in and around Kent, etc., etc. And the reason why they're reportable is that they are a threat to our native pollinators, including the honeybees and stuff like that. But the interesting thing that I brought this one up was because there's the earliest reported confirmed sighting ever was actually in Shropshire in January 2025. But suspected that it was linked to an importation of a particular product, and the Asian hornet come along with it as well. But since then, if you go onto the website, they've had some further sightings already in Kent, including the confirmed nest removal only a few days ago as well. So it's something to be aware of. And then finally, who thought bird flu was still an issue? And again, it's a notifiable animal disease. And during 3 months between November and January, as it says there, 1.8 million farmed and captive birds were culled as a result of avian flu. But the key thing is there's some updated guidance there that if you have birds on your premises that you suspect are affected by avian flu, then there's a new online reporting system, which might be of interest. I often have visions of how do you know that it's suffering from avian flu, and I just feel like it's like tucked up in its bed on a branch or in its little nest with a thermometer. But yeah, so yeah, any suspicions, feel free to report it to DEFRA. And on that note, there's a few updates. Hopefully they're of interest. Obviously, with the exception of the Asian hornet, nothing invertebrate related. Thanks so much.
Don't get too far, Chris. We do have just a couple of minutes for questions. Has anything come in online? If anyone had a computer. No? Anybody in the room have a question for any of our first 4 speakers? Dave, if you say it, I'll relay it again so that people online can hear it. So, Hans, if I can invite you to come up to the microphone. While you're doing that, if I can just summarise. So Dave Penny has asked a question in relation to argon. Come on up. If it's currently registered as a biocide. Hans, over to you.
No.
While you're still standing there, Chris, do you think it should be, from what we understand about nitrogen? So Chris has just asked if there's a derogation to use it as part of a research project. Some of you might know that we're no longer able to use nitrogen as an insecticide, as a biocide in the UK and in Europe. But in some European places, you can use it in chambers, but not a cylinder.
Yeah, my understanding of the legislation was that you couldn't, that cylinder-based was still okay. Production of your own nitrogen, that was the issue.
Chris, come and be at the microphone. So people online can hear, because it's very complicated but also interesting.
Yeah.
I think Dave's already alluded to it as well. If you sort of read the definition of a biocidal product, it's like a chemical or biological. It's a product that can biocidal products that control harmful or unwanted organisms through a chemical or biological action. The definition of a biocidal product. So previously, Rentokil supported nitrogen and carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
And when you go on the HSE biocidal product like database, you can see those products entered and authorized, or although lapsed now for nitrogen.
Yeah. No,
So it's a case of understanding where we're at with
exactly.
argon.
It's certainly an interesting question, which I'll definitely follow up on. But no, we don't have any. Our understanding of the legislation was that it was. Yeah, come on.
I think this is really important.
Yeah, it is.
We've got a really interesting product. Sorry, I'm not just
No, no, no.
It's a really interesting product, and it
Yeah.
gives us options.
Exactly.
But what we don't want to do is fall foul of the
course.
authorities. And one of the things, and I know AD was really involved with trying to sort out the mess with nitrogen, because basically Europe decided that nitrogen was a biocide, despite the fact that 80% of what we're breathing in this room is nitrogen.
Exactly.
Now, if you can trust legislators like that, then that's a problem. So one of the arguments with nitrogen was that we're actually not using it to kill them. We're actually using it to exclude oxygen.
Exactly.
So it's not a biocide, it's a lack of oxygen that's killing them. You are saying argon is more effective because it's more toxic to the insect. Now that could be a poison chalice.
Well, we're not saying that it's more toxic. It's better at driving away oxygen. So in creating these environments, you're actively but it's a really interesting point. Thanks for
I
raising
think
it.
we'll follow up this
exactly,
discussion.
certainly. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Unfortunately, I think we're more or less at time. Unfortunately, we need to move on. I know Christian Bars had been continuing the discussion with the HSE, and I haven't been in touch with him for some time, so we'll redo that. So I'm now pleased to welcome the first of our online presenters. We have Caleb and Ashley, who are part of the museum team at Colchester and Ipswich Museums. Welcome, it's lovely to see you both. And they are going to talk to us about the interesting experiences they've been having with wool insulation at the mansion.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm Caleb, how'd you go? And I'm Ashley Scopes, and we're museum assistants for Colchester and Ipswich Museum Service based in Ipswich. And we're going to talk you through two webbing moth infestations, one that happened in the stores, Ashley's going to take you through, and then one in Christchurch Mansion, which is a Tudor era mansion in Ipswich in Suffolk. So hopefully, if all goes well, we're going to share a video presentation that we're going to go through. So let's just hope that works now.
Start with share screen, I'd say. Oh, it's already up.
Yeah.
I'll go from here. Let's see. I just share the entire screen. There we go. So you should see right now, what you should see right now is one of our stores. Ipswich Museum at the moment is closed, and that meant we have to move all our objects into a new safe store. And that is what this is. You can see we've got lovely racking, and it's a really nice store, and we've done a very nice job kitting it out. A lot of the specimens in this store, hide that because I can't click my thumb. A lot of the specimens in the store is our natural history. Everything's quite edible. They all used to be hanging up on display in the museum. So that means we have to keep an extra close eye on them to make sure they're not getting eaten. And when did we do the decant? That was 2021 October was when we started, I think.
2022.
2022.
Yes. Yeah.
And pretty much this is a bit later, but we didn't see anything for a while. But then we started to get a constant stream of webbing cloth moths, as you can see here. It's probably quite a common sight, but I couldn't find any source for these moths. So looking around all the bags, checking all the specimens, and I couldn't find a source for them. And this kept happening for a couple of months until I went near one of the air vents in the ceiling, which had a littering of bugs coming from it, which is a bad sign, which caused me to look up into the loft space above. The loft space above has a big glass ceiling, used to be used to grow tomatoes during the war. But also, it seemed to be a place where moths were having a great time. I believe these are dead carcasses of moths. We've got them everywhere, throughout the entire attic space of this store, it was almost as if somebody had grabbed a bag of rice and just thrown it around the building. And we believe that this is wool insulation. Again, I think that was confirmed. Lamb's wool. And these dead moths were just everywhere. We'd caught it a good time, because at this point we weren't getting many moths downstairs, and the actual objects themselves still didn't have anything in them. So we immediately went, because we're a council-run organisation, we let our council people know who sort out the contracts and told them, we're going to need to look at this, because come summer, when the weather warms up, these guys are going to get really active up in the attic. So we let them know and kept monitoring the building. Here you go. Here's a really good picture upstairs. You can see natural all the way down, an absolute nightmare. Then there were these little vents down the bottom. They had cobwebs and they were full of dead moths as well. So it really was a red flag. A couple of months later, in April, me and my manager were walking through the store, and on this wolf specimen here, you can see, not in focus, I saw a live moth inside the bag, and it's red flags, of course. So immediately went tape to make sure it was zipped, just tape shut, put I think of just moth killer in there, all kinds of stuff. Constrain, yeah, I think we constrained it. And while I was doing that, my manager looked behind me at the wall of mounted heads, and there shouldn't be audio of this. I believe I muted that. This is the video of inside the wolf bag. This is what she saw hanging from the hanging heads. Moths all in the bottom. So immediate red flags. We were got all of the couple of the curators down, and we went, this needs to be dealt with now. So we immediately started going through all of our specimens, checking them for moths. And this was quite concerning as well, because what you see here is this is a sealed bag with a taxidermy specimen inside. And what we were doing when we were bagging these up, we were putting them on Corex, tying them down, putting them in plastic bags, and then rolling over the top of the bag and taping it shut. We would have thought that would have been airtight and nothing could have gotten in there. But even if there wasn't tape all the way along, they'd work their way in and walk the spirals of the bag, I believe, and they were just getting in. We couldn't stop them getting in. And you see, this is the bag in question. On the right-hand side here, this is where we roll over the plastic bags. And I would have thought that would be moth safe. But I guess with the number of moths we have, as you can see, it wasn't. So I believe this is the bottom of one of the taxidermy hanging heads. They were coming out of the attic, crawling down the walls, straight into the back of the heads, where we'd have to leave space for the hooks to hook them on. And you can see there was just hundreds and hundreds of moths. So every specimen we went through, we would unbag, we would constrain them, we would rebag, completely tape them. But because this was an entire store's worth of specimens, we have an on-site freezer, which it's massive, it's room side, it's great. But it still took ages to freeze them all. We had to literally sort them shelf by shelf, take an entire shelf at a time, walk them up obviously, to where we keep our room size freezer and freeze them for 2 weeks. I can't remember how cold the freezer is, but
Like -40.
Yeah, something like that. And we had to do that for basically an entire store. So it took a very, very long time, and then returning them with completely sealed bags, caked in duct tape. So nothing you'll get back in our fresh specimens. These are what we were finding. So we're just checking every bag. As you can see, the moth has eaten its way out here, left its cocoon behind. And same here, and we were picking them off. The most moth we picked off, live moth, off one specimen was 38. Or I think it was 38. Yeah, it's 37. So we made a little trophy for one of our workers for finding so many. And these weren't dead ones. These were picking off live moths and you see sticking them to the duct tape. You can also see on this, I think it's an ocelot. I believe these are eggs left behind the fur, not certain, but this specimen, the hair was coming out. And this one we found 30 in. But except from this one specimen, I think the rest of them we saved because we caught them early enough to where the fur isn't falling out of them. And we've done conservation checks as we're going through them. So it's lucky we caught with them when we did. So we found the first ones on the 26th of February and notified our people. And then we had our outbreak on the 23rd of April. It then took quite a while for the contractors to come in because the council has to go through and pick multiple people and find the most cost efficient version when it goes over a certain price, which is obviously a pain for us, but we did the right thing with what we had. And here we got some good photos. Here's our room size freezer with all our specimens in, and here's us taking some of our specimens up the street. We just had to do an entire store and take them to our freezer. And I believe it was on the 14th of May. I just know when I took this picture, 14th of May, we had contractors in. We had them over a couple of weeks, lots of different ones. And you can see they've put one of your traps here, pheromone traps, and it's just filled up. So after they came in, we got people to, the contractors came in, they removed all the insulation here. As you can see, it's completely stripped back. They removed everything, they hoovered, they sprayed as well with, I think it was deadline size spray. And we currently got some that we're checking to see if that can be used in the future, if it damages objects, etc. So we're testing on some wood. And we've got another photo after this one. So this is down the sides. What has obviously happened before we moved into the Hague, or for however long it's been a building, at some point pigeons and birds had got inside, they'd used it to roost. Obviously lots of bird mucks, which we know moths love, and nests, which they love, and dead birds. They did pull a couple of dead birds out. So the moths were ripping that to shreds.
We're currently waiting for some new insulation to go in, aren't we? But that's not happened yet.
So it's a bit cold in that building. But other than that, that one is sorted. Okay. So that's our first building. I'll now pass it over to
the next video on
Caleb's building in Christchurch Mansion. So all yours.
Okay. So a similar situation really to what Ashley was just describing. I'll try and rattle through because I'm conscious of the time. We discovered moths in the attic and in a Victorian bedroom. Moths had been discovered in this Victorian bedroom in the mansion for a long time by people who did the IPM checks even before Ashley took over a few years ago. But then rather than just this localized area, we started to realize that they were coming right down from the attics, didn't we? And one particular really clear piece of evidence of this is that this rather revolting image of a CCTV camera lens with a bubble cover over it of glass that moths are beginning to pool up in. And this is kind of really clear evidence to us that this infestation was beginning up in the attic space and working its way down. And Ashley, who does the IPM checks for this store and for this building, began to find more of these. So they'll just go forward in the presentation. So as you can see, began to find moths living in the attics in various traps. A lot of the things we found in cotton blankets, which obviously, in retrospect was a mistake for them to be up there. So a lot of them, fortunately, weren't actually damaging the objects. They were damaging the wrapping that was trying to keep them safe, because there's a lot of historic furniture kept in the attics of Christchurch Mansion. So I'll just go forward a little bit more. Okay, so in the attic space, there's crawl spaces with lamb's wool again, and it's treated with, is it borax? Yes, yeah. It's treated with borax, which Bob, our conservator, had been assured would mean that it wouldn't be suitable for pests eating it. But sadly, we've since learned that this is only true for a certain length of time. So you can't rely on borax, we've learned, for a long-term solution, even if your insulation is treated with it. So that's one thing that we're going to have to rectify in time. Similar to what Ashley described, this has now been removed from Christchurch Mansion, but we're waiting for the new insulation to be put in. And these crawl spaces, we've taped them up as a precaution for the current time as well, because if they're living in those crawl spaces, we want to prevent them from getting into the rest of the stores. So as you can see here, they've been duct taped up for the moment as well. Here's some more evidence of these being found. And some bags, in a neighbouring room. So this is probably the armoury, I'm guessing.
Yep.
So there's loads of, again, sadly, inside bags, which we hoped would be a defence.
We think this is historic damage, but we were checking all the objects again, and they were even falling into cases with nothing in, no edible objects, which was concerning.
And then this is a particularly bad example we found of a flag that had been eaten. Again, more in the armoury, some serious moth damage on objects that had been wrapped to some degree already. So then we began to move things away from the sides of the walls and the ceilings and the floors, because we're going to have some spray put down in here as well. So as a team, we began to do that, but we went into the sort of continued crawl spaces here. There's some more video of moths being found active there that Ashley's taken.
It just kept coming from one chimney, and it all led up into this area. I know we're conscious of time, but yeah, it was flooded up there once again, so we needed to get it out again.
Yeah, indeed. And then as we were beginning to get ready for this, though, unfortunately, the next sort of disaster that happened for us, really, just at the time we were hoping to start spraying to prevent, further increasing numbers of moths. Unfortunately, we caught not a moth, but a bat in one of our museum traps, which I'm sure a lot of people will realise can be quite a serious thing. Now, fortunately, the bat didn't die, and a specialist came in and looked after the bat, and it's now been released back into the wild and after going through that experience. But it would have cost us a £5,000 fine if the bat had died. And at that time, we were then told by the authorities that we had to remove all of our traps for sticky blunder traps, just as at the time that we had an infestation, which was not ideal, as you can imagine. But fortunately, we had the warning from those traps initially to know to be on the lookout. And at least we can now prepare. This is a new, improved trap that Ashley's modified so that bats can't get into it, and they've been approved to be returned into the attic and the mansion attics.
So there was lots of tactics, lots of people saying putting covers over them and etc. But we found there is a way you can fold the traps low enough that bats shouldn't be able to get in. It has been approved.
Yeah, so
by our local
bat specialists have approved that now. So we are now just waiting because we've been told we weren't allowed to do any of the spraying until the bat breeding season is over, which I think is now soon approaching. So hopefully we'll be able to put the spray down and move forward with a moth-free mansion, we hope.
Fingers crossed.
Okay.
I hope we didn't overrun there.
We're very slightly under time, so thank you very much indeed, Caleb and Ashley. I hope you can stick around. We'll try and do a few more questions at the end of this chunk of talks. You'll notice that there's going to be a bit of a theme in this second session of the morning. It is going to be very moth-based. So we're now going to hear about conservation efforts at the National Museum of the Royal Navy, which again is a moth case study. And Jade Pinkett is going to talk to us about this. She's one of the conservation technicians at the National Museum of the Royal Navy. One of her main responsibilities is carrying out IPM strategy with colleagues at the Portsmouth and Gosport sites. Jade, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is my first job after my master's degree in preventive conservation, so I'm still learning. So I'm happy to take any advice or suggestions from anyone else. So this is the store that has the moth issue. It's called the dedicated store. It houses most of our uniform collection. As you can see, most of the uniforms have covers on them, but they're not protective enough. So the moths are getting in through all of these gaps, and as well the boxes as well. So in 2021, moths were seen flying around the store, which then obviously realised that there was a problem. So then pest traps were put down and seen that there was a problem. But these covers, we knew that these had to be replaced. But this is something that within our conservation team, we didn't have the skills to make new covers. So this then started a volunteer project, which started in 2022, I think. So obviously one of my roles, big roles, is carrying out the integrated pest management. Unfortunately, recently, you probably may have heard, we had a cyber attack, which means we lost a lot of our data. I managed to collect some of my data from my own analysis, but as you can see, we had 172 moths in the autumn of 2023. But you can see, as we've been going through this project, they have decreased. So we can see that it is working. So, and before the new covers go on, I will condition check each uniform, check for moth damage, and then I will freeze. I'll wrap it all in plastic. At one point, all of the uniforms are being wrapped individually, but I changed it so that the whole rail is being wrapped. Then we can reuse that plastic, and we're not using too much plastic. And then we have the boxes as well. And then this is our walk-in freezer that we have, which is about -38. So these will go in for about a week and then defrost for 3 or 4 days. So because of these cupboards needed to be done with people with more skills, we started volunteers. So at the moment, I've got 2 volunteers, and they do most of their work from home. So they sew the covers, which are made from Tyvek, and they make padded hangers as well. And then they come on site and they help me repackage the uniforms. As you can see from the pictures, they remove the old cover, they put on the new cover, and there is a little slot on the side that they can put the label so that you don't have to take the cover off to see which item it is. And they all have barcodes as well. And one of the pictures you can see, the way it works on the bottom is that the bottom is folded and then tied. And then I will put a little bit of tape on the top where the hanger meets the cover to try and stop moths getting in. I mean, it's probably not going to be completely stop them, because as we've seen, moths can get into quite a lot of places, but it's just what we can do to try and prevent big numbers. And also using the old covers, we've managed to reuse them for making little bags for the uniform trousers that are packed in boxes, and also making little sort of protective cushions for the folds in the trousers, just to try and reuse materials rather than wasting them, but also protecting uniforms that are folded. So as you can see from the pictures, not only does it look better, it protects the uniforms more. And we are about halfway through. So obviously this started in 2022. So it has taken a long time. But to begin with, it was all the planning and making a cover, realizing it's not the right fit, making another one. Whereas now we've got quite a good system. So we're going on a little bit faster. And I have a thing about changing colors of red to green, so I use that quite a lot, which is quite good at illustrating how far we've come. Yeah, so there's likely to be a few more years on the project, but we're hoping to recruit some more volunteers as well. So obviously, this store isn't the only store that has the moth issue. So we have a store, these are all in the same building. This is the Princess Royal Gallery, which is a event space, but we have got multiple objects in there. And as you can see, it has a wall carpet. Unfortunately, there's not anything we can do about that wall carpet, so it's something that we have to manage. And recently, we have carried out a deep clean and found a large moth infestation behind one of the ship models. We managed to do a really big deep clean underneath, and behind that model, at the edge of the wall, we put down some diatomaceous earth to try and prevent the moths coming back. But that is just something we have to manage, unfortunately. And also, a couple of years ago, we found moths in one of our showcases in the galleries, which are housed downstairs in the same building. This case underwent lots of cleaning, and we also constrained it, but they still were coming back. It wasn't until we looked underneath the showcase, we realized there was a large gap near the silica gel tray, so the moths were making their way up and getting into that case. So what we did is we sealed the gap with Marvel Seal, which seems to have stopped the moths entering. It's still something that I check every 6 months, or usually just when I walk past the showcase. But that would be something we'd use for other showcases if it becomes a problem in another gallery. So our next steps with the store, the dedicated store, it's got historic flooring. So there are lots of gaps between each of the floorboards. And I recently saw in a webinar about putting diatomaceous earth in the gaps as well. My manager also suggested it. So that's what we're going to do, because I've seen the moths like the dust and the gaps and stuff like that. As I said, we're hoping to recruit for some more volunteers. We're also going to do a regular housekeeping plan to try and get the dust under like good level so that it prevents the moths from nesting. And with the new materials on the hangers, we're finding that they're taking up more space in the storage. So there might be a point where we need to have more storage or do a collection audit of the items. So that's something to think about in the future. Everything, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Jade. I have to say, it is almost impossible to stop moths getting in because the small larvae are very, very tiny. However, I suggest you talk to AD at lunch break about using transfluthrin in showcases. I think you'll find that really helpful. So, continuing our moth theme, we have the lovely Helen Smith, who's going to talk to us about moth hunting in wool insulation adventures in Kensington. And what did I write about Helen? I wrote, because Helen didn't send me anything, but I've known Helen for a while, so I took a guess, so I hope you like this, Helen. Helen was part of the conservation team at Historic Royal Palaces. She's now a self-employed preventive conservator, specialising in IPM and managing filming in historic sites. Yeah, that'll do. Book coming soon too.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. Well, you know, they don't need any more
They
publicity.
don't. Right. And I thought I had 20 minutes and I've only got 15, so I'm setting my little timer there. And we'll see how we go. Right. Hello. So this has been my first fully private client, and it's been looking at a moth plague of biblical proportions, really. So I'm not going to give you a full case study today. I'm probably going to come back next year and talk about that because I've only been monitoring in this property for 9 months. But there have been a few interesting things that have come out because of the nature of the site that I'm working on that I just wanted to bring up for the group as interesting things. So the property itself, it's a 5-story, well, I'd call it a townhouse, but it's detached. It's big. It is an official working residence in Kensington. My client has asked to retain anonymity, so I'm not going to say who they are, but my client themselves are from a different country than the UK, where they do not have a problem with webbing clothes moths. So it has been a bit of a surprise to them. There are different accommodation types within the building. There are permanent residents. There are staff living in the basement. There is a family who live permanently on the 3rd floor. First and second floor are official accommodation for the VIPs. And there's also official reception areas and catering. So it's quite a mixed use building. So residents and staff started complaining about flying moths in the air in about February last year. And it wasn't just the odd moth here and there, it was actually to quite a distracting level, especially in this 3rd floor accommodation. So they called in a pest contractor that was local to London who had a look, and to be fair, the strategy that they used was not bad. It wasn't quite enough for the level of problem that we encountered. And in addition to that, the third party who employed me for the client was advised to find a heritage IPM consultant. They found me through the Conservation Register, lucky me, and I was called in. The brief I was given was to investigate the outbreak, to outline a strategy for remediation, to provide a list of suitable pest control firms and services, assist with technical briefs and specifications, being mindful of important artefacts and historic fabric, provide a watching brief on pest control operations, and a final sign-off for works. So the very first thing I did was explain to them how a final sign-off was not something they were going to get, because this is going to take years, not just months. So I was quite reticent to actually take on this client because I knew how much work would be involved in onboarding a new client, especially one without a heritage background. I've set up not just plain old IPM monitoring systems, but I've set up specifically moth project monitoring in more than one property. And even with a heritage staff behind me, it's quite resource heavy to get started. So I spent quite a lot of time, especially in the first 3 months, educating the client as to what would be involved and helping them to understand the questions that they actually needed answered rather than the ones they thought they needed answered. So this is the main roof space. So of this 5-storey building, which runs from lower basement, ground, first, second, third floor, and then there's a main roof space above. This, where's my pointer there? There we go. Behind here, behind this breathable membrane is all natural wool insulation all the way through. The building itself had a full renovation that was completed in, I think it was 2021, and the roofs were off and put back on, and wool insulation was introduced throughout the entire roof space. And you'll see in a minute how complicated the roof space is. So this is the easy access bit, but it's also the bit where we've got the really big problems with moths. So it didn't take very long to work out that, yes, the problem was coming from the roof space above, and the moths had basically 4 years to build their population, and then they were spilling down into the rooms below. Close up. Oh, lots of moth activity. The winter of 2023 to 24 in London was a particularly mild and wet one, which may have contributed to this blooming of the moth population in that particular winter and creating population pressure, bringing them down through the building. So the actual roof it's quite complicated. There are 2 main roofs. There's the one that I've shown you. There's a second roof that's above the second floor on a wing. There are, where are we? Sorry. There are lofts. There are mansards. There are dormer windows. There are roof skirts around parts of the building, and there are eaves which have eaves voids behind them. And in most of those areas, apart from the main roofs, the 2 main roof loft spaces, there is wool insulation, which is almost impossible to take out without actually taking the roof off again. So after a while, so when I first was brought in, there wasn't any monitoring going on. So the pest control company had come in, they'd put some AF strips out in the roof space and throughout the building, and they'd started a treatment, they'd sprayed using various chemicals, and they'd also introduced wasps, which are going to be talked about later, I believe. The problem with the wasps was that they weren't actually able really to access the moths themselves, because the trichogoma wasps, they don't particularly like furry, fuzzy surfaces, and all of the wool was behind these breathable membranes and not very easy access, and also clearly quite deep in the wool because it had been going on for several years. I asked the pest contractor if they wanted to work with me in collaboration, and they didn't just decline, they ignored me. So I went into partnership working with Dave Lachlan at Histrionics, who has been very, very helpful. Together we formulated a plan for treating these spaces. So what was decided by the client on our advice was they've taken out about 80%, I think, in total of the wool from the building in all the areas that you could physically get to. So the middle picture is with the insulation gone, and then this picture on the right, this is with the new rock wool insulation installed and a new breathable membrane. So it doesn't look much different, it's a lot cleaner. There are still pockets of wool, and most recently we discovered quite an important patch of wool which will have a bearing on what we see in the results. So this is just a very quick outline of what the building looks like, very, very simplified. There's also a dry riser stack. So a dry riser system is a system of pipework that connects to the outside at the ground floor that the fire brigade can use to send water through the building, and it can come out at each level. The dry riser pipework in this building is contained in service cupboards on each level. And we had a suspicion that the moths were using that as a superhighway to get down through the building, which has been shown to be the case. So what I first looked at, so I've been monitoring now, I was given permission to start monitoring from July So the first real data we've got is from August last year, which is why I haven't even got a full year's worth of data to talk to you about. But there are some interesting things coming out already. So in the roof space, you can very, very clearly see the massive difference that taking out 80% of the wool has had. September is 0 because that was the month when they took the wool out, so we had no monitoring going on then. And it's been lovely, low levels and a little bit more in March, which I think is not just to do with the spring. I think it's also to do with the fact that David and I found a patch of wool that had been missed that was sitting right on top of the dry riser stack. And we took it out. We isolated it, took it away, but I think that will have disturbed things. And so there have been more moths out in there. So all of the sticky AF traps look like that or worse until after Christmas. Yeah, and you had moths flying around your head. It really was biblical. On the third floor, which is this accommodation level, the picture is slightly more complicated. So now I'm looking for secondary infestation. I'm looking for the fact that we know the moths have come down into the building. Have they found new places to feed and breed? And again, I'm slightly worried about this. I knew it was going to go up in March, but it's higher than I wanted it to be. And I hope this is to do with that patch of wool we disturbed from the top of the dry riser. Time will tell. Hopefully there'll be another drop next month. On the second floor, this is the one that's got the most important textiles in the building. There are silk curtains, there's a bed canopy, there's a silk and wool tapestry. It's not massively over furnished, so it's relatively easy to manage the contents, but there are very large scale wool carpets, which we have been treating with Constrain to help to keep down activity. On the first floor, much more like what you'd expect to see in your average historic house. And the ground floor, now the ground floor and the first floor, there's a mezzanine that connects the two. So I'm quite pleased that actually there's still lower activity on the ground floor. And the basement, the only activity is actually in the dry riser cabinets. These ones, they're like, yeah. So this is what I think is happening with the moths coming down from the main roof at various points. We have timed aerosol dispensers in the roof space, dispensing a chemical treatment, and we initially had those in each of the dry riser cabinets. We've replaced those now with transluthrin strips, and they seem to be quite effective. So as well as the moths that I'm catching on my monitors, there's also quite a lot of dead moths in the base of each of the cabinets. But what I thought was quite interesting, because I know that Dee had asked a question several months ago about whether people were catching more moths on blunder traps than on pheromone traps. So I had a look at my data, specifically from the dry risers going down through the building, and it's quite true. There is more catch on the blunder traps than there is. So this is, I just put together, this is the variety of moths that I've been finding that come under the pest category. There were some big, pretty ones as well, but I'm not taking pictures of those. So you've got, interestingly, Indian meal moths, a couple in really unusual places, and I haven't quite worked out where they're coming from because obviously they're not interested in the wool. But plenty of Tiniola piceliella, your odd Hoffmanophila, Pseudospatella, your brown house moth. And then I've got not one, not two, but 3 different kinds of spotted, dotted, or variously shaped Tinaid moths of some kind. They're clearly from the Tinaid group, and the odd Monopis moth as well. The other interesting thing that I found is I've been finding some moths which are very definitely female. And you know they're female because they've shed their eggs on the trap as they've been caught, and some of those eggs sometimes have hatched, and you get lots of lovely little larvae. And I forgot, I ran out of time yesterday. I've got a little video of a live larvae on a dead moth. So if you're here in person, I can show you on my phone. It's quite fun. But I'm getting them not just on the blunder traps, but I'm also getting some females on the pheromone traps, which is just interesting. You know, I mean, we know that it's mostly going to be catching the boys because it's attracting them, but they're also sticky traps, so they are going to catch the odd girl as well on there. That's just an overall picture of where we are, which makes me feel a lot better about the work I'm doing at the moment because the levels overall are a lot better. And that's me. So if you've got any questions, obviously I can't name my client, but I'm happy to talk about methodology with you. And that's it. Thank you very much.
So we finish our Moth Fest with our second online presentation, which is Louise and Kelly from the Landy Conservation Company talking about parasitoid wasps at Burley House. Louise, Shuri and Kelly Grimshaw work for the Landy Company Textile Conservation Limited, so I'm going to assume they are textile conservators. So hopefully we have them with us and they're ready to go. Perfect. Welcome, ladies. It's all yours.
Hello. Hi, can everyone hear us all right? So if I just share that. We just need to share the screen, bear with us. Go to more. Yeah. Willoughby. Hi. So today we'll be discussing the work we've been carrying out with parasitoid wasps at Burley House since May 2022, beginning of some background on the house and us. So Burley House is a grade 1 listed example of...
You might need to check your output audio.
Oh.
That's better. Yeah, say something else.
Can you hear us now?
Certainly can.
Technical difficulties. Yeah, we all okay?
Yep, that's grand.
Brilliant. So Burley House is a grade 1 listed example of Elizabethan Renaissance architecture situated in Stamford. It opens annually to the public between March and November, and it's a working stately home with integrated offices, and it continues to be occupied by members of the Cecil family today. The Landy Company is a private textile conservation studio, and it's been based at Burley since 1992. We conduct biannual housekeeping of staterooms containing state beds and tapestries, as well as providing ongoing care for Burley's textile collection. So in 2021, we undertook a 4-month feasibility study to trial the implementation of parasitoid wasp Trichogramma evanescens to combat an ongoing webbing-clothes moth infestation in one of the state bedrooms at Burley, as previous IPM measures had failed. We traced the infestation to the composite underlay beneath the carpet, and the simplest solution would have been to just remove the underlay entirely, but that was not an option. So the study was multifaceted. We aimed to assess the viability of parasitoid application within an historic house. We wanted to also factor in the economic and labour costs that were involved, as well as the ease of parasitoid application. So obviously the study was subject to multiple variables. The internal and environmental conditions of the stateroom remained fairly constant and within acceptable historic house parameters, but they did fluctuate. The wasps were placed on smooth flooring, but in unfavourable conditions beneath the carpet underlay, meaning that dispersal distance could not be measured. And finally, wasp placement was limited to 2 accessible areas of the infestation core. The feasibility study resulted in the following conclusions: that wasp application obviously requires thorough planning, and it's best suited to localised treatments of areas that are otherwise inaccessible using other forms of IPM. So whilst moth numbers did decrease over the trial, the brevity of the study prevented sort of any firm conclusions really from being drawn regarding the efficacy of Trichogramma evanescens. However, the decrease in findings was a positive indicator, and it suggested that an extended trial covering multiple breeding cycles could be undertaken. So further, an extended trial is essential to assess parasitoid efficacy. Trichogramma wasps, as you probably know, only target the egg stage of the webbing-clothes moth cycle, and as such, the population decline of the moth is gradual. Following the feasibility study, we implemented the parasitoid wasp Trichogramma evanescens as part of the treatment approach to the webbing-clothes moth infestation in the aforementioned state bedroom at Burley.
So trichogramma have now been placed continually in the space for almost 3 years, since the 11th of May 2022. And this is done on a monthly basis. They're placed beneath the carpet underlay in 2 locations within the 31 metre squared room, and a pest survey is conducted. The internal and external environmental conditions continue to be recorded on the date of the new wasp placement and pest survey as well. Alongside the wasps, insecticide applications are applied to the top of the carpet in localised areas if deemed necessary by Burley's housekeeping team, and a blunder trap is placed in the room by an external pest contractor quarterly. Initially, the wasps were placed in the room every 2 weeks via cards as per the feasibility study methodology. However, in July 23, the manufacturer altered the delivery format, and whilst placement continued unbroken, subsequently the wasps have been received in sachets and are placed in situ monthly instead. The parasitoid moth eggs within the sachet are of varying ages, resulting in a staggered wasp released. Some of the sterilised moth eggs within the sachet are unfertilised and so provide a host for some of the hatching wasps, creating a staggered release pattern from the sachet over the course of the month. This supply method should release approximately 6,000 wasps per sachet rather than the 2,000 wasps per card.
So the graph on the right of this slide shows all of the moth findings from May 2022 to April 2025, and this includes live and dead adults and larvae, both above and beneath the carpet. The first spike you can see in the data is at the beginning of the wasp placements in May 2022. This was the first pest survey carried out following the feasibility study. There had been an 8-month gap between the feasibility study ending and the wasps being reintroduced. And with the exception of a pest survey on the 8th of November 2022, following house closure for the winter, there had been no further IPM intervention in the state bedroom by the Landy Company. So as you can see, there are a couple of further spikes in the data in July and August of 2024, which we think may be partially due to environmental factors. So 2024 was the 4th hottest year on record in the UK, and internal temperatures of the state bedroom did remain mild, above 18 degrees C between April and September. It's likely that this resulted in a continuous moth breeding cycle, leading to a spike in numbers. Further to this, the delivery of wasps every 4 weeks means that occasionally 2 placements and surveys are undertaken within the same calendar month, and as such 2 sets of data were gathered in July 2024, one at the beginning and one at the end of the month. This kind of helps to explain the increase in numbers. However, it doesn't then explain the subsequent spike in numbers that we see in August 2024, when only 1 survey was undertaken, suggesting that the increase in numbers was more likely due to the environment. Ideal conditions for trichogramma are 20 to 29 degrees centigrade. So as moth numbers spiked in 2024 due to increased temperature, arguably trichogramma parasitisation would also have increased. However, trichogramma only target the egg stage of the moth life cycle, as we've said. And so whilst parasitisation efficacy may have also increased during these warmer months, existing larvae and adult moth numbers would not have been affected. So there would have been an inevitable delay on parasitisation success becoming visible in the data through declining moth and larvae numbers. Furthermore, at room temperature, we know that moth eggs have a faster hatching cycle. So the window for successful parasitisation by trichogramma is even narrower. Given that parasitoids are most effective at low pest densities, it is possible that during these consistently warmer months, the levels of webbing-clothed moths simply became overwhelming, making pest suppression impossible without a substantial increase in parasitoid numbers. So the state bedroom is unheated. Whilst it does absorb warmth from the lived spaces that are above, below and behind it, it does remain cooler, and its temperature does fluctuate gently in line with the external temperature of the building envelope. Between May 2022 and April 2025, relative humidity levels in the state bedroom fell within trichogramma thresholds, generally remaining between 50 and 60%. And for 27 of the 36 months that the wasps have been in place, the internal temperature remained above 15 degrees centigrade. So we know that that's the minimum temperature at which trichogramma activity and fecundity increases. However, consistently between November and March, temperatures in the room dropped below 15 degrees centigrade. So whilst trichogramma can be active at lower temperatures, the annual drops in temperature between November and March may have reduced their effectiveness, allowing for a slight increase in moth numbers towards the early part of each year. However, lower temperatures would also have slowed the moth breeding cycle, resulting in fewer moths being found between November and March. So overall, the data sort of reflects all of this, and findings correlate with expected peaks in the breeding cycle, increasing during the warmer spring and summer months and decreasing during the cooler winter months.
So carrying out parasitoid placement within an historic house environment over a 3-year period has provided us with sufficient data covering multiple moth breeding cycles to assess parasitoid efficacy and hopefully see the gradual decline in the moth population. However, the true effectiveness of the wasps remains hard to discern due to a multitude of variables. So as you just discussed, unlike environmentally controlled museum spaces, the nature of an historic house means that the environment remains within accepted parameters but cannot be fully controlled. And this can lead to favourable breeding conditions for closed moth and conversely may not always offer favourable conditions for the parasitoids. Further to this, the Landy Company is not responsible for Burley's IPM care holistically, and there is a known moth problem in the private rooms that back onto the south and east walls of the state bedroom. Consequently, it is likely that even if treatment were entirely successful, there would continue to be pest ingress from surrounding rooms. The infestation core being in the underlay means that it is largely inaccessible, with the exception of 2 points of access. One is in the northeast corner of the room where the carpet can be lifted, and the other is via a split in the carpet that extends beneath the bed towards the centre of the room. Whilst the wasps offer an ideal solution to target a space inaccessible by other IPM approaches, this also means it remains impossible to gauge both the extent of the infestation within the underlay and the effectiveness of the parasitoids beyond the accessible areas. Trichogramma are known to be more active in diffuse daylight, and as part of the feasibility study, research has been conducted into the practicality of placing trichogramma beneath the underlay in complete darkness. Although not ideal, this proved to be a viable option, and placing the wasps beneath the underlay risked reducing their effectiveness, but it put them at the infestation core and so increased the likelihood of the wasp encountering host eggs following emergence. Monthly inspections continually disturb the same areas of the underlay as well, and this may have caused the moths to migrate further into inaccessible areas. And finally, whilst it is highly likely that without any intervention, webbing closed moth numbers would have escalated exponentially, without control, this remains a hypothesis.
So where are we now? Following the spike in moth numbers in 2024, we decided to introduce a pheromone alongside trichogramma, and in this regard, we approached David Laughlin at Histrionics. Trichogramma continue to be placed beneath the underlay, but are now used in conjunction with 4 T-Protect pheromone confusers. 3 are placed above the carpet and 1 is placed beneath. In collaboration with Histrionics, T-Protect have now been used in conjunction with the wasp for 6 months, and we'll continue to implement this treatment method for a further 6 months to gather sufficient data. Looking forward, we plan to cease trichogramma wasp placement entirely and implement a T-Protect pheromone confuser only for a duration of 1 year to determine whether the moth population has been affected by the presence of the wasps. As a control, we would like to cease all IPM intervention within the room. Obviously, this isn't ideal, with the exception of a blunder trap for a duration of 1 year. However, this is only feasible provided moth ingress into the state bedroom does not reach critical levels. So finally, in discussion with Histrionics, we're also researching the application of an alternative parasitoid, Baryscapus tinivorus. This is a slightly larger parasitoid wasp that's delivered in a vial every 4 weeks. These wasps target both the egg and larval stage of the webbing closed moth life cycle and offer a greater chance of success, hopefully, in reducing the moth population. So, as we discussed, the implementation of parasitoids is not an immediate solution. As you know, it does require forward planning and repeated implementation over an extended period if it is to stand any chance of success. Thank you for listening. And if you do want to reach out to us, you can see our details on the screen.
What I love about these open meetings is that we always get such an amazing range of presentations, different levels of different experiences, different approaches. It's fantastic. So we do have a little bit of time for questions. There are any? Oh, lovely. Thank you very much, Luke. Would either someone from the committee or someone from the Bodleian like to nominate themselves to run around with a microphone? Thank you. So, do we have anybody in the room with any questions for any of our presenters? Or indeed any comments on anything? Yes. Nice easy one for the microphone.
Hi, I'm Emma Skinner from the Oxford Conservation. It's actually a question for Chris. Trap Act. I just wanted a little bit more clarification on the use of pheromone and blunder traps, and whether, you know, if we're using them to catch moths, and that's our intention, whether you think we need to make any adaptations to using those in regard to this new law, and whether, if you're saying that if we've done a kind of small risk assessment and we can, you know, maybe checking that there's, to the best of our knowledge, that there's no known other pests around, such as mice, whether you're saying that it is okay for us to need.
If you've done your little risk assessment and you've got no evidence of rodent activity, then I would suggest that you carry on with your monitoring program, as simple as. Again, I think too many people are getting a little bit, I don't know, excited about the Glue Trap Offences Act, but that was primarily aimed at the use of glue traps specifically for rodent control. So if you're doing your monitoring program for moths or silverfish, etc., and you've just done a simple little risk assessment, it doesn't have to be nothing too onerous, that says there's no history of rodent activity, or you don't perceive there's any risk of catching non-target mammals, whether it be, well, bats as an example as well, then yeah, carry on as you are.
And went up here at the front, and then was that?
Hi, it's AD here. Just to reiterate what Chris was saying, my understanding is that the pheromones that we're using in the AF traps, for example, they are perfectly legal. So there is no situation where you have to be concerned about the use of them. From our observations from our survey, we've also found that very few people are actually catching mice in blunder traps or floor traps. But as Chris said, before you put things down on the floor in particular, it is a good idea to check whether or not you have a mouse problem, and then deal with that before you then put the traps down. There's nothing worse than having a blessed thing stuck to it, which you then have to whack over the head with something or other. But the other thing to bear in mind is that if you've got a mouse problem, then there is evidence that dead mice are becoming a food source for moths. So you can begin to see how this all ties together. So before you flood the place with pest traps, do a generic survey of what's going on in the space, have a look to see whether you've got mice as well as other activity, and then deal with that as a primary concern, because I'm sure the rest of the people in the room and on the committee will know that mice do have an impact on moth numbers.
Certainly do. Thank you, Adi. And if you're not sure what you're looking for to find if you've got a mouse problem, either chat to Chris or talk to me and we can explain what to look for. So I know there are a couple of hands, but I think there are some online questions. So have you got a microphone, Alex? Perfect. Ask away.
Okay, so we had a couple of questions from Zoom. I think this one was for Jade, but might be more for the steering committee. This is from Derek Draper. The National Museum of the Royal Navy are using -38°C to kill pests. At Birmingham, we're using -30 for 3 days. Do you need to go down to -38 to be effective? And if not, would the slightly less cold temperature help save some energy costs and be more environmentally friendly?
And I can see you bouncing. Absolutely, which is the process that we use. Dave, did you want to add anything? No. Yeah. So I think -38, if it will go down to that, lovely, but you don't need to. So actually you can adjust your thermostat. Okay, thank you. Next.
And we had a few comments, but one more question. Do you think it would be a good idea to have a group or list of rodent control contractors, suppliers who we could recommend that we could share? Is that something that we could provide? No.
I think that's almost impossible, but Helen and Chris, and remind me who else? Amy, have been working on some contractor guidelines. Have we got those finished yet? Right. So it's still in progress, but when they're done, essentially those are going to be our recommendations of what you should be inserting into a pest control contract and what you should be looking for. As a very basic level, I should say you need to be looking for someone who's part of BPCA. So that's the British Pest Controllers Association. Dave, microphone for Dave, please. Thank you.
I just want to add to that in a word of warning that contractors, and many of you here have experienced, that they do not understand heritage, do not do things properly. And you sometimes, as Jane has said, you need to get somebody like Chris in to do an independent audit. If you have a a real problem, you know, not just a superficial one, do get some specialist advice, and don't accept that the buildings people who are managing your building deal with the rodent contract, and they don't understand it either. And that's one of the key things. I'm going to pass you back to Chris, because I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings, is that maintenance people deal with the contracts, but you are dealing with the IPM.
I mean, I think I'll just add that pest control contracts in general are seen as a cost rather than an investment. So when you're dealing with a facilities maintenance company, often price talks. And it's unfortunate because it has long-term consequences. All I would say is that we can't even recommend contractors. But the key thing I always think is treat it like a job interview. Find the person that's the most enthusiastic, knowledgeable, and has got some suitable backup. Some people have good experiences with the nationals, some have bad. So it's a bit hit and miss, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And it very often does come down to the individual contractor. So, you know, it may be that one person with the company is really good and the next person that you deal with is dreadful. So unfortunately, no. Were there any more questions online, or was that it? No. So I think I saw a hand go up somewhere in the middle first. Dominic, and then I'll come to you, Amber. And ladies, was there a hand?
Dominic Wall, Hertfordshire Archives. It was a question for, I don't know if are Caleb and Ashley still online?
Yep, we're still here.
Caleb, Ashley?
Yep, still here.
Talking,
Yes.
but
Yes.
can't hear.
They're there.
Can't
So
hear them.
ask
Okay.
your questions.
Yeah. So the question is, yes.
They'll be
yes.
sorted out by the time you finish.
Is that, can you see? Hello, hi there. Can you see any means of bagging up your material so that it is proof to insects? As you seem to have done something that you know reasonable, but it didn't work.
My instant reaction to that is that Ziploc bags are very good, but sometimes we're dealing with things that are very large that it's kind of not really very effective to try and find bags that are that big that are going to be airtight Ziploc ones. Sometimes we have to work with very large plastic sheeting and then do the best we can with duct tape. So that's the drawback, really, and it'd be probably quite expensive to get bags that are quite that big that have that feature. But I think that's the ideal.
I think like a lot of the bags we had, it was just that we were rolling them as tight as we could and taping a little bit. When we refreeze them and put them back, we taped the entire way down the end of that bag, so you could not crawl and all your way around. And we did have a couple of problems, like so with big specimens like a horned taxidermy, where it was just taping bags together into a Frankenstein. When one big bag probably could have done it, but it's just tying Tyvek knots around bag openings and taping everything completely shut, and you should be fine. But they can get into it easier than you think they can.
Yeah, it is almost impossible to prevent a tiny larvae. You know, you're looking at something which is probably less than a millimetre long when they're first hatched from getting in. What we do know are quite effective are the vacuum seal bags that and I will have to name names, because the ones that Lakeland sell that are produced in Japan, Dee with English Heritage has done some extensive testing, and they are the most effective because you suck a vacuum. So there's nothing to get into essentially, and also they're barrier film. They're not actually polythene. Does mean you need to be careful, because they're very easy to get a pinprick in, and I've got some at home. You know, they just go on the wooden top of our wardrobe. You get a pinprick in very easily, and you lose the vacuum. So we'll just take one final question from Amber, and then we are slightly over time, so we do need to go to lunch.
It's a comment. Are we having a chat about wool insulation after lunch?
We are indeed, yes.
Okay. Well, so my comment is, it's great to see the evidence that wool insulation is leading to moth infestations. It's a kind of silent bit of information, but just for information. So at English Heritage, no wool insulation is used in our properties for this reason, or any natural insulation products. But we can come back to that.
We can, absolutely. So can we just do another round of applause for all our speakers in person and online? Huge thanks to all of them for being brave enough to share their experience, because it is very alarming. We will be back here for those of you who are online at 1 o'clock. People in the room, we'd like a prompt start, please. So please go and get some lunch. We'll see you here.